Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. I'm coming to you live from Indianapolis, the site of the NFL Scouting Combine. We've talked to Browns General Manager Andrew Berry, Coach Kevin Stefanski, and a number of draft prospects. Here to break it all down with me is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. Chud, how you doing, bud?
Scott, I'm doing great. Jealous of you in Indianapolis. I'm here in chilly Cleveland, Ohio, holding the fort down. But a lot of good memories in Indy, man, covering the Cavs playoffs and different things throughout my career of going to Indy personally and professionally. It's a great city to be in, no doubt. I've never actually gone to the Combine though. I've always thought the Combine was interesting because it's kind of like one of those deals where for fans, it's like, I just can't get into it, but yet it's very important for the teams, right? I mean, it's something that, general managers and coaches, you figure things out there.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think if you're not here and maybe you're not into the nitty gritty of the NFL, schedule, it can kind of just be a bunch of noise. But when you're here, it feels important to me. It's a big step in the draft process. Obviously, free agency starts in 2 weeks from yesterday. So there's a lot of discussions going on within teams, among teams. So I think it is a big deal. And for a guy that's covered it now, I think this is year 18 or something like that. I really enjoy it. And I do think it's important. And, I spent so much time focused on the Browns that I don't watch a ton of college football. And this really kicks off the draft process for me. You get to see these prospects up close. I like to size them up, right? How big is this guy? What's he sound like? How does he handle his interview? You put a name to a face to a name. And for me, that's what the Combine is about, in addition to, running into former Browns coaches or talking to general managers kind of off the record. There's a lot to take in and absorb during this time in Indy, I think.
Yeah, this is really important for you. You've told me that over the years that you're able to get a lot of info and learn a lot from the Combine. So this is big for you, and it goes a long way in what you write about throughout the year and your prep work and everything. Can you kind of outline for people what happens there? Because It can maybe be a little bit confusing because it goes on for a lot of days and there's a lot of different things that go on, right? Because you have interviews at one point and then you have, their workouts at another point.
Yeah. Like for the players, like yesterday we talked to quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends. So the next day, so today, Thursday, those players, those position groups will work out and they'll be in Lucas Oil Stadium where the Colts play. And that's when they do the 40 and they do if you're quarterback, you throw, and if you're receiver, you run routes and go through those drills. You do the vertical jump, the broad jump. So it's kind of staggered. The interviews with the media are one day, the workouts are the next day. And then throughout the whole process, the players are interviewing with the teams, whether it's informally or formally. There's a lot of meetings going on there, but there's all kinds of different position groups. So, I think the workouts continue through Monday, I believe. And they get started today, and NFL Network will show them. I will be in the first quarterback receiver session. Midview graduate, Kent State guy, Justin Crum is going to be one of the guys throwing in that first session. So I want to watch him. He'll throw to, receivers and tight ends. It's broken up alphabetically. So the guys at the beginning of the alphabet is who I'll get to see in that early workout. But it's fun. I've watched one of those workouts before. You can see it on TV, but I'll be in a suite at the Lucas Oil Stadium, breaking it down and just trying to keep an eye on Dustin and seeing how he's doing.
Any big changes after the pandemic and COVID, or is it back to normal?
Yeah, it's pretty much back to normal. There's not a whole lot of masks being worn. But yeah, you're in a scrum. It's the first time I've been in a, full-on media scrum in a couple of years, where there's 50 people, shoulder to shoulder. I would say the crowd's probably a little bit smaller as far as number of media here, but it's the same setup. It's a lot of the same vibe. You're seeing all these guys lined up, and there's a barricade, so we're not super close to players, but we're close to each other. But yeah, it feels like it did a couple years ago. And then, it's not all about just the draft, I should mention, right? GMs talk, coaches talk to the media, because you do have that free agency component, right? That comes before the draft. Like I said, it's March 16th, it's league year starts. March 14th, you get that 2-day negotiating window. So there's a lot of those elements to take care of. So to me, it's like you have the Browns part of the combine where you talk to Barry about potential free agents and what's going to happen with Jarvis Landry. And then you have the draft prospect part of it where you talk to quarterbacks and receivers and defensive linemen the Browns could draft.
Sure. So Andrew Berry talked first. That was Tuesday, and then Stefanski was yesterday?
Correct.
And did we really learn a lot? I mean, maybe no breaking news, but we know these guys don't tell you a ton, but you can kind of figure some things out because you are a master coder, correct?
Yeah, right. Got to get working on my doctorate in that. There's no, I would say there's no breaking news. The headlines to me were, if you look at brownzone.com, these are probably the headlines, but, Barry reiterates that he fully expects Baker to be the starter. Stefanski says he's still going to call the plays despite the struggles last year and the tweaks to the offensive coaching staff. Trying to think, I mean, those are, and then Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry's a big one, right?
Jarvis, yep.
Yeah. It sure sounds like they're ready to say goodbye to him. Barry's going to meet with Jarvis's agent, and maybe they can come together on a restructuring. But the tone was certainly, it's a business. We thank Jarvis for his service. He really helped the turnaround. But, And that's how it felt from Andrew Berry and even from Kevin Stefanski yesterday, talking about the business part of football. So, I would be surprised if Jarvis stays. And when you talk big picture, that means the Browns are going to have to find another receiver, right? And find another veteran receiver because they're not going to have the number 1 and 2 guys from the start of last season. And you're left with Donovan Peoples-Jones and Anthony Schwartz, Demetric Felton. And you need 1, 2, 3 guys, probably in even at least 2 at the top of that depth chart.
Wow, I could go one of 2 ways here, and the way I'll go is the way I go, and the way I don't go, I'll come back to. I was going to go Baker Mayfield, but then now it's like, do I talk receivers? Let's go Baker real quick and put that to bed. You're probably not surprised at what they said, and we've talked about this a few weeks ago around the Super Bowl. This is what you expected them to say, right? The question is, do you believe them?
Exactly. Now, I expected them to say that because nothing has changed since the end of the season, where Andrew Berry said the same thing, right? He fully expects Baker to be the starter in 2022 and rebound from a disappointing season, a disappointing, injury-filled season. So nothing has changed for Andrew Berry to change his stance. Now, if he said the same thing on May 1st, then that's newsworthy because by May 1st, you will have had the opportunity to trade for quarterbacks, the opportunity to sign free agents, and the opportunity to draft a quarterback in the first or second round, right? So then we'll know what the quarterback room looks like, the quarterback landscape. And Kevin Stefanski admitted as much yesterday. He said yes when asked if he's still confident in Baker, fully confident in Baker as a starter. He said yes. And then he got asked about, do you need to bring in a challenger? And he said, we are challenging these guys anyway, yada, yada. But he left the door open for changes at that position. And that's not breaking news because we expect that. If your quarterback plays poorly and doesn't have a contract extension, then at least my working assumption is the Browns will change that position. Whether it's sign a guy, trade for a guy, draft a guy, that position's going to change. And then the question will be, okay, is Baker still the starter? Have they added competition? Have they just added a backup? Have they added a rookie who will sit and watch for a year, but then maybe take over the following year because Baker's not under long-term contract? Those are the things that can change in the next 2 months. So the stance today or yesterday or whenever Andrew Berry said it really isn't a surprise.
Yeah, great points there made by you. It'll be interesting to see it play out, no question. We've been talking about it, and then we'll watch and see what happens. But that's all we can do right now. And I want to get to the wide receiver now. You know, you talked about Jarvis Landry, and I'm going to eventually get to Garrett Wilson, and that's a big name, someone that you guys talk to and is there. Do you think the Browns go wide receiver at 13 for sure?
I don't. I get the.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying I don't think it's a certainty. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is I just feel like organizationally, when they rank positions, receivers, I don't think at the top of the list, right? I think you have receiver. I'm sorry. You have quarterback, pass rusher, probably offensive lineman, cornerback, and then receiver. Now, I don't know that for certain. I'm just saying that feels like how the Browns think when they go about building their roster. So do they think that 13 is too valuable of a resource to spend on a receiver? And I don't know that, and I'm sure Andrew Berry or Paul DePodesta would say that they're willing to make exceptions. And we saw that, right? We saw them trade up to take a linebacker. Nobody thought they would do that in the second round last year. But they did for, JOK. So I would never rule it out. I just think they prefer to get a receiver in the second round and think that maybe the gap between 13 and 44 isn't that great. This is my opinion. And the other factor is, who knows how defensive end's going to shape up? Do they re-sign Jadeveon Clowney? Though they haven't yet. If they don't have Jadeveon Clowney and Tack McKinley is a free agent and suffered a torn Achilles at the end of the year, they don't have anybody behind Myles Garrett. So could they draft a pass rusher, defensive end at number 13, and then you pair a guy with Myles Garrett for the next 5 years? That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Right?
You know what though? But Scott, here's one thing I'm going to say though, and I know that you're right about where they rank the positions, but maybe is it time to think differently in the aspect of, and I know wide receiver isn't as important at cornerback and the defensive line, but they did go out and get Myles Garrett and they did go out and get cornerbacks. You just saw the Bengals go to the Super Bowl after drafting Jamar Chase. The Rams were what they were big time because of Cooper Kupp and then eventually getting Odell Beckham Jr. Another story we could talk about before we end. But the bottom line is, man, if you see a guy at 13 that could be a difference maker and change this offense, which, we need, it's amazing, but we do need a receiver. I mean, do you have to consider it?
Yeah, you definitely have to consider it. And, plenty of mock drafts have the Browns taking a receiver. And I would not be stunned if they took one. I'm just saying I don't think it's a slam dunk. Like, I feel like
good call.
Most people believe it's going to be a receiver, and I'm saying there's reasons it might not be a receiver. And, it comes down to, Chud, you know this, it's about the player, right? If you love the player at 13, regardless of position, then you probably take that guy. But you also have to rate it. Do you think, are you better off with the edge rush you get at 13 and the receiver you get at 44, or flip it? The receiver you get at 13 and the edge rusher at 44, right? It's about depth of class, depth of position. So I would be surprised if it weren't one of those two positions, although I think you have to leave a little bit of a door open for quarterback, and a smaller door for defensive tackle, because that's also a big need. But I'd say 80% is going to be receiver, defensive end at number 13.
But who at quarterback at 13?
Well, I mean, the two guys would be Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll talk more about that in future episodes. But you're right. I mean, they would be doing themselves a disservice if they took a receiver that was, let's say, 8 players down the board compared to defensive lineman or another position at 13. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. I mean, say you could get the third best edge rusher at 13, and think you could, get the 5th best receiver at 44. Whatever that calculus is. Or you have a plan where you move up from 44 and you think you can get to 28 and Chris Olave's there. And then you go, okay, well, is, Jermaine Johnson, the pass rusher from Florida State, plus Olave, a better combination than Garrett Wilson and edge rusher X at 44, right? I mean, that's what you go through. So, like I said, I would not be surprised if they took a receiver, and I might even bet on receiver 13. I'm just saying I think fans shouldn't be surprised if it winds up not being a receiver.
What are your thoughts on Garrett Wilson and obviously headlines with him going to the same high school as Baker?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Baker is his guy. And, maybe if it winds up being Baker, right? If he's a starter because you can't find a better option or the Browns really believe that he can bounce back. And then if that's the case, right? If Baker's going to be the guy in 2022, then you got to figure out a way to make it work with Baker. And, adding a guy that is good, right? Everybody's watched Garrett Wilson at Ohio State, light it up, a really impressive guy, really impressive player. If you also know that he has some kind of connection with Baker because they went to the same high school and they threw together during quarantine, Wilson said yesterday, then that, to me, that just adds to it, right? I mean, you wouldn't take a player just because he has a connection with Baker, but if you already love that player and he's got a connection with Baker, and Baker's going to be your guy, I like that, right? So I could see Garrett Wilson at 13. Don't know if there's I don't think it's guaranteed that he will get to 13. There's a lot of good players in this draft. There's some other good receivers that the Browns would have to consider. Burks from Arkansas and Drake London from USC are two guys that I was impressed with looking at them yesterday. You got Jameson Williams. I get all these names confused. The Alabama kid that tore his ACL. Would you take a flyer on him because if he hadn't torn his ACL, he'd be in the discussion. So there's other receivers to consider, but I like the idea of Wilson, and I do like that Baker fact.
Other article I saw, or at least a tweet by you, was talking about the chemistry because that was being questioned, right? At the end, we talked about it, and the players had kind of alluded to it. Anything there?
Yeah, it's interesting. That was kind of one of the themes of the getaway day, right? We talked to these guys the day after the season, and it was there's not enough team chemistry, and we need to build more camaraderie. And Andrew Berry, when we talked to him, and then Kevin Stefanski again yesterday, really kind of downplayed that. And their opinion, and I think it's an organizational opinion, is when you lose, people are looking for reasons, right? And that includes the players. And that's, I don't know if it's an easy thing to point to, but I think it's a kind of nebulous thing that players can point to. Well, the chemistry wasn't good enough. And I'm not saying the players are wrong, but what I'm telling you is that Andrew Berry in January and Kevin Stefanski yesterday both really downplayed it. And they're not downplaying the need for team chemistry. They're downplaying that it was an issue this season. I don't know exactly if I believe them. I would say that when you had the Odell Beckham Jr. issue at midseason and guys were coming out saying we'd welcome him back even after the video and even after Odell never apologized for the video and let Baker Mayfield hang there, I think that I'd be surprised if that didn't have some impact in the locker room, right? So I guess the overall point is it's interesting that Stefanski was the latest to kind of downplay that when the players made an issue of it, and it seems like a real thing. Now, I don't think it's the reason the Browns went 8-9, but I do believe that it can be improved. Because why else would the players say that?
Sure. Another story, they're going to have a joint practice with the Eagles. Yeah. Do you like that?
I do. I was trying to remember if I've covered many joint practices because they had some on the road that I didn't go to with Tampa Bay a year or two. And maybe I covered some in Rochester when they did the Bills during Mike Pettin's time here. But it had been a while since I covered them until last year when the Giants visited. And I do think it just changes the dynamic of a training camp practice, right? You get so bored. You've been out there, Chud. It's the same thing every day. There's a lot of monotony. Now you bring in these fresh faces, and not only does it spice things up energetically for the players and the media and the fans, it also gives you a better evaluation tool because you see your guys going against other, new guys, and it's ones versus ones. And I do think that's valuable. So, and I know Kevin Stefanski really thinks it's valuable because he wanted to do it in his rookie year in 2020, and then the pandemic shut it down. So I like it. You got to worry about the fights, but outside of that, I think it's beneficial. especially when we see fewer and fewer A-list players actually play in the preseason games, especially in the early preseason games.
And you mentioned it earlier, but Stefanski said he's going to continue to call the plays.
Yeah, we talked about that. I'm fine with that. I understand the question, obviously. I understand if someone said, hey, the offense wasn't good enough and he's calling the plays, so that's a problem. I don't think that was the biggest problem. I think quarterback play was a bigger problem. So, yeah, but Kevin Stefanski is going to be the guy. He still gets input from other people. He's stressed that Alex Van Pelt, the coordinator, still has a dominant voice, not only in helping call the plays and with the game plan, but in the quarterback room, because now they switched and Drew Petzing, the former tight ends coach, is now going to be the quarterback's coach. And they didn't have a quarterback coach the last 2 years. It was Van Pelt in that role. So this takes some of that off his plate. But Stefanski was clear in saying Van Pelt still has the dominant voice in that quarterback room. They just think adding Petzing to the equation will help.
So anything else before I have one last thing I want to bring up that doesn't have to do with the combine? Anything else from the combine you want to hit on?
No, I don't think so. And all the kind of things that I glean from here, we'll talk about in the run up to the draft, right? If I think Treylon Burks, does he look big enough? And how this guy sound? And, Malik Willis, I'm going to work on a story about him today, the quarterback from Liberty. I really liked how he talked yesterday. And of course, that's not the end-all be-all, but he's also a great athlete with a big-time arm, right? So if you kind of draw that stuff together, I could see how a coaching staff or an organization would see him and interview him and think, man, I like this kid and I kind of like where his head is and where his attitude is. So we'll talk about a bunch of these things, but, that's another thing you take from the combine. But I think we hit on all the big points, Chuck.
Last thing, we never got a chance to talk about the Super Bowl. You got it right with the Rams. I think we both got the cover. I got to tell you though, man, I just can't believe the Bengals. They made two major mistakes in my mind. The end of the game there when they had that 3rd and 1 handing off to the backup running back. When you got Mixon and Chase and all this talent, and you handed off to P. Ryan, and they did it in the first quarter too. He had 2 carries for 0 yards. I just hate, the reason I'm bringing it up, I hate sometimes when the coaches get so cute because, hey, the Bengals were very close to winning that game.
Oh, they certainly were. There's no doubt about it. That's an interesting point you bring up, Chud, because, I think when I feel like I'm so in depth with the Browns that when they go to Dearness Johnson on a 3rd down or whoever it is, I know that they're going to do that because I've seen them do it all year long or in practice or whatever. But some fans wonder, well, why isn't Kareem Hunt getting the ball? Why isn't Nick Chubb on the field? And that's just not how the Browns have it set up. But when I see it, so I understand it, and it doesn't, maybe stick out to me as much as it would a fan, and I understand the thinking. But when I watch it in a huge situation like the Super Bowl with another team that I'm not as familiar with, it does stand out to me too. Like, well, why is that guy getting the ball and not the other guy? So, you have an interesting point, and I do think the Bengals should have won that game, right? I mean, they had every opportunity to expand that lead. I mean, they got the non-call at the start of the 3rd quarter, which was big. But they had chances to win that game and couldn't do it. And, part of it was because their offensive line couldn't hold up.
And other thing is, I don't know. I love Al Michaels. He's maybe my favorite play-by-play guy. I mean, he's right up there. Big fan, and I saw you tweet this. I don't think he and the national media really are giving the proper credence or whatever the word would be for OBJ necessarily. The perspective, the national perspective compared to local.
Yeah, Sean, I can tell you what I got. I just kind of thought it was an offhanded tweet that I put out about Al Michaels talking about OBJ, and it got all kinds of traction, Twitter traction. But yeah, I just think that they got it wrong. They got the OBJ leaving Cleveland, winding up in LA narrative wrong. That's not how it happened. The Browns didn't just give up on OBJ. He quit on the team. He forced his way out of town and wound up in LA. And we've talked about it. I don't think the ends justifies the means in this situation. You can still say, hey, good for Odell that he won a Super Bowl, and that's what Stefanski said yesterday. But I think he should have toughed it out with the Browns. And I think just because he got that Super Bowl doesn't mean he handled it the right way at all.
Yeah, but I will say this: he ended up doing better than I thought he would. I'll give him credit, and it's a shame he got the injury, but yeah, didn't like the way that he went about doing it for sure.
Yep, I'm with you, bud. I'm with you now. And then it's sad that he tore the ACL, and we'll see what happens. Can he come back again? Because he's had a lot of injuries the last whatever. Now we're looking at 5-6 years of injuries, something like that.
Yeah. Hey, go get some St. Elmo's.
Thanks, buddy. I'm gonna do some writing first. Watch a quarterback workout, and then I'm gonna go get something. I'll tell you that. So, Chud, thanks for taking the time, buddy. We'll do this again soon. We got free agency starting in 2 weeks, so we're gonna have plenty to talk about. Probably from now until the draft, or at least plenty of weeks from now until the draft. So, thanks again, Dave Chudowsky. Thanks everybody for listening. You can find all my work at brownzone.com. And this has been the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. Thanks.